I'm very, very happy to welcome Lyle Peterson and Roberta DeBiase to the ASM headquarters tonight to tell us a little bit about West Nile virus. Come on up. Thank you so much for doing this.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming to this talk. My favorite subject. So what I'll first talk a little bit is give you a little bit of an introduction to the West Nile virus very briefly, and then talk about the epidemiology and the transmission of the virus, and then I'll turn it over to Roberta, who would talk about a little bit more in detail about the clinical aspects and more of the virology. So the way it's transmitted is it's transmitted primarily by Culex species mosquitoes. And the virus overwinters in adult female hibernating mosquitoes in temperate climates. So what basically happens is everybody wonders, where do all these mosquitoes go? And in a northern place like Washington, D.C., or Maine, or Chicago, or places where you don't see any mosquitoes, basically these kinds of mosquitoes, what they do is the female goes into this thing called diapause, which is basically a hibernating state, and she finds this nice warm place to hang out. So your favorite sewer system or your basement, these mosquitoes just sit there on the wall all winter long. And then they emerge in the spring when it warms up. And so the virus is actually in the mosquitoes, and it's probably transmitted to those hibernating mosquitoes through transmission from transovarial transmission through the eggs. And so these mosquitoes that are infected are just sitting there in your basement or wherever, and they come out in the spring when it gets warmer, and they start a transmission cycle. And these species of Culex mosquitoes that we're concerned about are primarily bite birds. And so birds, unfortunately, are really good hosts for the virus. And many passerine species, like robins, for example, develop enormous levels of virus, like 10 to the 7th plaque-forming units per milliliter. You can find birds like crows, which get like 11 logs of virus. And some of these birds fly around happily with 11 logs of virus in their blood. So you basically got bags of virus flying around. And so these mosquitoes bite birds. So she comes out in the spring, finds a good bird. And American robins seem to be very good for this. Then in turn, more mosquitoes feed on that bird after it's become viremic, and which in turn infects more birds, as those mosquitoes bite more birds and infect them. And then finally, about the middle of the summer, you get huge numbers of infected mosquitoes. And you get so many infected mosquitoes that humans and horses become at risk. Humans and horses are actually not the favorite targets of these mosquitoes, but there are so many around that you actually, some of them will bite humans, obviously, and then humans become a risk. The thing is humans and horses do not create very high levels of virus in their blood. Although we get sick, the levels of virus in our blood is quite low. And so we actually don't infect mosquitoes very well, so we're considered dead-end hosts. So this is primarily a mosquito-bird thing, and humans are just incidental or dead-end hosts. So I'm going to just touch briefly on the clinical presentation, just to provide a little bit of background for what I'm going to describe with the epidemiology. And then Roberta will talk a little bit more, a lot more in detail about the clinical aspects. So if a person gets infected with a virus, about 70 to 80% of the people will have no symptoms at all. About 25% will develop what's called West Nile fever, which is kind of a misnomer because about half the people don't have fever, but they still get sick. And less than 1% will develop what we call West Nile virus neuroinvasive disease, which is meningitis, encephalitis, or acute flaccid paralysis. So this is what happened. I'm going to show you a series of maps, and this map here shows the situation in 1999, and you really can't see much going on. And the colored dots are the dots of the incidence of human neuroinvasive disease. And the green area is area where we detected the virus, mostly in dead birds. And you can't see much going on here because it was very focal in '99. There only human cases occurred in the New York City area, although the virus was found throughout New Jersey, parts of New York, Connecticut, and as far as Baltimore. So the virus had spread much further than the human cases. And this is what happened in 2000. The virus went north in the beginning part of the year, up in the upstate New York and Massachusetts, and then in the south, although you can't see it because it's pretty small here, but we could detect virus kind of going south with the southern bird migration towards Florida. And so in 2001, there was green areas you could see that extended pretty much past Chicago, throughout the eastern part of the U.S., and human cases started appearing in the Florida and the southern states, as well as in the northeastern states as well. And then in 2002, the whole situation changed, where we had the first massive outbreak. And you could see that the virus had spread all the way to Colorado by that point, but caused this huge outbreak in the Chicago area, Louisiana, Mississippi, parts of Texas. And in 2003, there was another massive epidemic in the Western Plains states. And unfortunately, I became one of those dots because we had a big epidemic in my town. And the virus had spread all the way to the West Coast. And in 2004, we sort of started entering this endemic pattern where you just saw cases scattered throughout the U.S., a midsection of the country, in California and elsewhere. And so this kind of pattern continued in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. In 2010 and 11 look basically the same. I'm not going to show those, but you can see that the virus became endemic throughout the U.S., and there were sporadic cases all over the country every year. So why did this big increase occur in 2012? Well, the kind of the smoking gun was it was really hot last year. And on this map, I have the ranking from 1 to 118 of the hot over 118 years of recording, each state's rank of where they were. So a state that ranked 118, which is the record hot, was the hottest year on record for the last 118 years. And you can see from this map that almost every state was way abnormally hot. We had the fourth warmest winter, a record warm spring, the second warmest summer, and a warmer than average autumn. So why is temperature important? Temperature does a couple of really bad things to these arboviral diseases. One is it shortens the time from when a mosquito becomes infected, so when it bites, let's say a bird, and gets infected, to the time when it gets infectious. So what happens in the mosquito, the virus bites a bird. It ingests the virus. The virus has to pass and multiply in the mosquito, pass out of the gut, multiply in the hemolymph of the mosquito, migrate to the salivary glands, and reach a high enough concentration in the salivary glands, and hence the saliva, so that when it bites you, it can transmit the virus. That process takes a number of days. That process is called the extrinsic incubation period. So if you increase the temperature, that period shortens. The other thing that temperature does is it increases the viral replication of the mosquito. So when it's warmer, the mosquito develops much higher concentration of virus in its blood and is able to more easily transmit infection. So here's what happens when temperature is cool. The virus, or the mosquito, emerges as an adult. it mates, and we can talk about mosquito mating later. It's kind of an interesting process. But so the mosquito mates, and the female mosquito is the only one that takes a blood meal because it wants that blood to make protein to make her eggs. So the mosquito will feed on the infected bird, become infectious itself, so at the beginning of the yellow bars, that's when she gets infected. She goes out and lays her eggs, and then she may feed on a person. If that extrinsic incubation period is long, in other words, in cool weather, there's not enough virus yet in the saliva of that mosquito to infect a person. So in cool weather, the mosquito has to live a really long time to pass that extrinsic incubation period to be able to pass the virus. But if it's warm, what happens is that extrinsic incubation period is short, so after she lays her eggs and then goes to take another blood meal, she's infectious, and that's when you get infected. So temperature is very, very critical to this whole process. So that's it, and I'll turn it over to Roberta.
So let me tell you a little bit about the clinical disease, and we purposely put this in twice just to reorient you. So just to reiterate, what we're talking about for neuroinvasive disease is the very, very tip of this iceberg, and even a smaller percentage are fatal. But I guarantee you, when you see a child or an adult come into the hospital with severe disease, and I'll give you an example of a case we recently took care of, it doesn't matter that you're 1 out of 150. It's you that is paralyzed or has seizures and is going to have long-term sequelae. So what do these patients look like? As Lyle mentioned, West Nile fever is the vast majority of patients, and he's right. We rarely see these patients come into the hospital at all. They do come into primary care physicians' offices or into our emergency room, and it's a very nonspecific febrile illness. So there's really nothing about it that would distinguish it from any other febrile illness that we see in children or adults. They generally have fever. They'll have headaches, sometimes body aches. There is sometimes some GI symptoms, so they'll come with nausea and vomiting. It can be mistaken for a routine viral gastroenteritis. About half of the patients can have a rash, which is very nonspecific. They can have swollen lymph glands, and they usually feel very tired, even after their rash recedes. And Lyle's nodding his head, so I think when he had it, he felt tired too for a while. So that leaves us with prevention. And there are things you can do as a person and things that can be done as a community to help prevent this disease. Lyle is obviously the guru of the community interventions, but these are things that you see here, such as spraying areas for mosquito areas that have large amounts of mosquitoes that are infected, that are circulating. But as a person, what we tell our patients and what you should know is that you can use sprays such as DEET-containing sprays. The amount of protection you'll get depending on the percentage of DEET that you use is important to know. A lot of people don't know that. So if you're going to be outside for 5 to 8 hours and you're not going to have any other spray, you need to use a very high percentage of DEET, so 30 to 50% DEET, whereas if you're going to go out for an hour, you can use a lower percentage. You need to look at your can and see if you're getting effective coverage, or you need to keep putting it on. Repairing screens, so you want to prevent mosquitoes from coming into your house. And in Colorado, no one has screens, so we used to always laugh when I showed the slide. And then you want to be very cognizant of any standing water in your yard. So even dog bowls and anything that collects water, you need to change those frequently because those are areas where mosquitoes breed.
So I should mention that our audience tonight is not only those of you in this room, but a vast crowd of people in the cloud watching these talks at ASM student chapters and elsewhere. And the video will also be archived, and it'll be hosted on the Microbe World website. So if you want to see it again, or if you have friends who are interested in it, it will be there, especially to our two speakers tonight.